The moon hung low and bloated in the sky, its silver light spilling through the cracks of the old mud house like water through broken clay. Inside, 14-year-old Amara pressed her trembling body against the cold wall, her heart pounding so loudly she feared it would betray her hiding place. Through a narrow gap in the wooden door, she watched in frozen horror as her stepmother, Nkechi, stood in the center of the compound, surrounded by 3 women draped in dark wrappers that seemed to swallow the moonlight itself. Their faces were painted with white chalk in twisted patterns that made them look more like spirits than humans. In the middle of their circle sat a clay pot filled with something thick and black that bubbled without fire, releasing smoke that coiled upward like serpents reaching for the stars. Nkechi's voice rose and fell in a language Amara had never heard before, words that seemed to scrape against the very air, making the night birds fall silent and the crickets stop their songs. The 3 women swayed and chanted in response, their voices weaving together into something that made Amara's skin crawl with dread. Then Nkechi reached into a leather pouch hanging from her waist and pulled out a small cloth doll, no bigger than her palm, stuffed with herbs and tied with red thread. She held it up toward the moon, and Amara's blood turned to ice when she recognized the pattern on the doll's wrapper. It was identical to her father's favorite cloth, the one he wore to important gatherings, the one that had mysteriously gone missing 3 moons ago. Amara's breath caught in her throat as understanding crashed over her like a wave of cold river water. This was not just any ritual. This was dark medicine, the kind whispered about in frightened voices around cooking fires, the kind that could steal a man's health, his strength, even his very life. Her father, Oba, the kind and gentle man who had raised her alone after her mother's death, who worked from sunrise to sunset to provide for his small family, who had remarried Nkechi, believing she would be a good mother to his precious daughter, he was in terrible danger, and he had no idea that the enemy lived under his own roof. Amara's hands shook as she realized what she had stumbled upon, what forbidden knowledge now sat heavy in her chest like a stone. She needed to move, to run, to warn her father, but her legs felt like they had grown roots into the earth beneath her feet. She watched as Nkechi began to drive long thorns into the little doll, each one accompanied by words that sounded like curses wrapped in honey. The other women's chanting grew louder, more frantic, and the smoke from the pot thickened until it formed shapes that looked almost human, almost alive. Amara knew she should not be seeing this. There were things in this world that were meant to remain hidden, things that could mark a person's soul forever. But she could not look away, could not stop the tears that began to stream down her cheeks as she thought of her father lying asleep in his room, unaware that his own wife was calling down darkness upon his head. Then, as if sensing something amiss, Nkechi suddenly stopped mid-chant and turned her head sharply toward the door where Amara hid. Their eyes met through the crack, and in that single terrible moment, Amara saw something in her stepmother's gaze that was not human. Something ancient and hungry that had been hiding behind the mask of a normal woman. Nkechi's mouth opened, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp, too many, and she pointed one long finger directly at Amara while speaking a single word that echoed through the compound like thunder. "You!" Amara's body finally obeyed her mind's desperate command to move, and she stumbled backward from the door, her feet tangling in the hem of her worn wrapper as pure terror flooded her veins. Behind her, she heard Nkechi's voice rise to a shriek that seemed to split the very night in two, calling the other women to action with words that crackled like fire consuming dry grass. Amara did not waste time looking back. She turned and ran with every ounce of strength her young body could possess, her bare feet pounding against the hard-packed earth of the compound as she headed for the only escape she could think of, the back gate that led to the forest path. The night air rushed past her face, carrying with it the sound of pursuit. Not just footsteps, but something else, something that sounded like the beating of great wings and the hissing of 1,000 angry snakes.
Her lungs burned as she pushed herself faster, faster, jumping over the low fence at the back of the compound and plunging into the darkness of the bush where the trees grew thick and wild. Branches whipped at her face and arms, thorns caught at her wrapper and tore it, but she did not slow down. She could hear them behind her, closer now, their voices no longer sounding entirely human, but rather like a pack of wild dogs closing in on wounded prey. Amara's mind raced as fast as her feet. Where could she go? Who would believe her? Even if she reached the neighboring compounds, would anyone dare to stand against Nkechi, who had quickly become known in the village as a woman not to be crossed? Her words carried weight at the marketplace, and her anger could turn friendships cold. Then, just ahead, Amara saw it, a small clearing where the full moon's light fell bright and clear, illuminating the grass like a stage prepared for some terrible performance. She hesitated for just a heartbeat, knowing that stepping into that light would make her fully visible, but the sounds behind her left no choice. It was either the light or the grasping darkness where her pursuers waited. She burst into the clearing, and the moment her feet touched the moonlit grass, she heard Nkechi's voice again, now terrifyingly close, speaking in that ancient language that seemed to pull at the very fabric of reality. Amara tried to keep running, tried to reach the other side of the clearing where the forest continued, but her body suddenly refused to obey her. Her legs locked in place, as if invisible hands had seized them, and she felt herself falling forward, her hands reaching out to break her fall, but finding that her fingers would not spread, would not flex, were changing, were no longer fingers at all. The transformation came like lightning and fire combined, shooting through every part of her body in waves of indescribable sensation. Not quite pain, not quite anything she had words for, but certainly horror, certainly wrongness, certainly the feeling of being unmade and remade into something that should not exist. She tried to scream, but the sound that came from her throat was not her voice. It was the bleating cry of a goat, high and plaintive, and filled with all the terror her human voice could no longer express. Her vision shifted, colors becoming strange and flat, her sense of smell suddenly overwhelming, as thousands of scents flooded in all at once. She looked down at where her hands should have been and saw hooves, black and hard, attached to legs covered in short brown fur. Nkechi emerged from the tree line with the three women flanking her like shadows giving flesh, their faces twisted into expressions of satisfaction and dark triumph that made Amara's new goat heart pound with pure animal fear. The stepmother's eyes gleamed in the moonlight as she approached slowly, deliberately, savoring every moment of Amara's transformation and terror. So, the little spy thought she could hide in corners and watch what was not meant for her eyes. Nkechi said, her voice now cold and measured, stripped of any pretense of the kindness she showed to the village and to Oba. She circled Amara's new goat form, and Amara tried desperately to speak, to beg, to explain, but all that came from her mouth were more helpless bleating sounds that seemed to amuse Nkechi greatly. The three women who had participated in the ritual stood at the edge of the clearing, their expressions unreadable in the shadows, but Amara could feel their eyes upon her, could sense that they were witnesses to this dark magic and therefore bound to keep its secrets. Nkechi reached into the leather pouch at her waist and pulled out a length of strong rope that looked like it had been soaked in something dark and oily. She approached Amara, who tried to run, tried to use her new goat legs to escape, but her body still felt foreign and uncooperative, and Nkechi moved with supernatural speed, seizing the rope around her neck before she could take more than 2 stumbling steps. The rope burned where it touched her, not with fire, but with something deeper, something that seemed to reach into her very spirit and bind it just as surely as it bound her body.
"You will not speak of what you saw," Nkechi whispered, her face close enough that Amara could smell herbs and smoke on her breath, "because you will not speak at all. You are nothing now but a goat, and tomorrow, at the great market in Ogidi, I will sell you to the highest bidder, and you will disappear forever from your father's life. He will believe you ran away, ungrateful child that you are, and he will console himself with the new wife who truly cares for him, who would never let harm come to him. The lies dripped from her mouth like poison, and Amara felt something break inside her chest. Not her body, but her spirit. The part of her that had always believed that truth would win, that goodness would prevail, that her father's love would somehow protect her. But her father was asleep in his house, unaware, and she was here, trapped in the body of an animal, bound by rope and magic, about to be sold away like common livestock. Nkechi began to drag her back through the forest, and Amara stumbled on her new legs, falling several times onto the rough ground, scraping her new skin, feeling thorns pierce her new skin. The three women followed behind, silent as ghosts, their presence a reminder that this was real, that magic was real, that the world contained darker things that Amara had ever imagined. They did not return to the compound, but instead took a different path that led to a small abandoned hut on the outskirts of the village, a place where no one would hear if a goat cried through the night. Nkechi tied the rope to a thick wooden post inside the hut, checking the knots with careful hands, making sure there would be no escape. "Sleep well, stepdaughter," she said with a smile that held no warmth whatsoever. "For tomorrow you begin your new life, and I begin mine free of your watching eyes and your father's divided affections." Then she and the three women left, closing the door behind them and plunging Amara into darkness so complete it felt like being buried alive. Amara sank to the dirt floor, her goat body shaking with sobs that came out as pathetic bleating sounds, and for the first time in her life she felt truly alone, truly hopeless, truly convinced that evil had won and that morning would bring not rescue, but only the final separation from everything she had ever known and loved. The first light of dawn came slowly, seeping through the cracks in the hut's walls like reluctant water, and Amara, who had not slept at all through the long and terrible night, lifted her head at the sound of footsteps approaching. Her heart, which had felt dead and cold through the dark hours, suddenly sparked with a desperate hope. Perhaps it was her father. Perhaps somehow he had discovered the truth. Perhaps rescue was coming. But the door opened to reveal not Oba, but Nkechi, accompanied by a young boy Amara had seen before in the village, a clever-eyed child of perhaps 12, named Jide, who worked sometimes as a helper to the traders at the market. Nkechi had changed from her ritual clothes to a respectable wrapper and blouse, her hair freshly plaited, her face arranged into an expression of businesslike efficiency that showed no trace of the darkness Amara had witnessed the night before. "This goat needs to go to Ogidi market today," she said to Jide, her voice crisp and businesslike. "I will pay you well to lead it there and help me find a good buyer. The animal is young and healthy, as you can see, and should fetch a fine price." She handed Jide the end of the rope, and the boy took it with a small nod, his eyes flicking briefly to Amara's face in a way that made her wonder if he saw something there, some spark of the human soul that still lived behind the goat's eyes. Nkechi left them alone for a moment as she went to gather some items for the journey, and in that brief window of time, Amara did something desperate. She looked directly into Jide's eyes and tried with all her might to communicate, to show him that she was not just a goat, that something terrible and wrong had happened, that she needed help in ways that went beyond simple human kindness. Jide stared back at her, his expression shifting from casual interest to confusion to something like recognition, and Amara saw his eyes widen slightly, as if he had perceived something that should not be possible. He glanced quickly toward the door to make sure Nkechi was not returning yet. Then he knelt down close to Amara and whispered, "You are not just a goat, are you?" It was not a question born of certainty, but of intuition, of the kind of knowing that children sometimes possess before the world teaches them to ignore such things. Amara's heart leapt with such force she thought it might burst from her chest, and she nodded her goat head vigorously, desperately, her eyes filling with tears that she had not known goats could cry. Jide's face went pale, and he rocked back on his heels, his young mind clearly struggling to make sense of what he was seeing. "Medicine,"
he whispered, using the word that meant both healing and magic, both blessing and curse, the word that encompassed all the invisible powers that shaped the world beyond what eyes could see. Bad medicine, he added to Amara's onik. Amara nodded again, and Jide's jaw set with a determination that seemed too old for his young face. I will help you, he said quietly, but we must be careful. If she suspects that I know, she might... He trailed off, not needing to finish the sentence, both of them understanding that Nkechi's power was not something to be confronted directly or foolishly. The sound of Nkechi's returning footsteps made Jide stand quickly, his face becoming blank and obedient once more. But as he took hold of the rope and prepared to lead Amara out of the hut, he gave her the smallest of nods, a promise, a pact, a spark of hope in the darkness that had consumed her world. They set out for Ogidi market as the sun rose higher, Nkechi walking ahead with her basket of goods, Jide leading Amara by the rope, and other villagers beginning to emerge from their homes to start their daily work, none of them knowing that the goat passing through their midst was actually Oba's beloved daughter, trapped and terrified, being led toward a fate worse than death because it meant not dying, but rather living forever as something she was not, among people who would never know her name or her story or the terrible injustice that had been done to her in the darkness of a full moon night. Ogidi Market sprawled across a vast open space like a living creature, its many sections divided by muddy paths and wooden stalls that groaned under the weight of goods from every corner of the region. Yams piled high as a man's head, dried fish that filled the air with their pungent smell, brightly colored cloth that fluttered in the morning breeze like trapped birds trying to escape, goats and chickens adding their own voices to the symphony of commerce. Nkechi led them to the livestock section, where animals of all kinds stood tied or penned, their eyes reflecting the confusion and fear that came from being among so many strange humans and unfamiliar smells. She found a good spot near the main path, where traffic was heavy, and began to arrange her goods, setting out some vegetables she had brought as a cover for her real purpose. Jide stood beside Amara, holding her rope loosely, his eyes constantly scanning the crowd as if searching for something or someone, to the what exactly even he did not seem to know. Amara's mind raced with desperate thoughts. Perhaps someone in this crowd would recognize her somehow. Perhaps her father would appear by some miracle. Perhaps the magic would simply break and she would transform back into herself right here in the middle of all these witnesses. But the minutes stretched into hours, and nothing changed except the position of the sun in the sky and the number of curious buyers who stopped to examine her, prodding her sides, checking her teeth, discussing her potential as if she were nothing more than a piece of meat that had not yet been cooked. One man in particular caught Nkechi's interest, a wealthy-looking trader with gold rings on his fingers and expensive leather sandals on his feet, who said he was looking for young goats to start a breeding herd. He offered a good price, better than Nkechi had hoped for, and she smiled with barely concealed satisfaction as they began to negotiate the final terms. Amara felt panic rising in her chest like floodwater threatening to drown her. She looked desperately at Jide, and Jide seemed to understand that time had run out, that if he was going to act on his promise, it had to be now. He waited until the trader had pulled out his money pouch and Nkechi's attention was fully focused on counting the bills. Then he suddenly yanked hard on Amara's rope, startling her into motion.
"Run!" he shouted at her, his young voice cutting through the market noise, and Amara did not need to be told twice. She bolted forward with all the strength her goat legs could provide, the rope burning through Jide's hands as he deliberately let it slip, giving her the freedom to flee, while crying out dramatically, "The goat! The goat has broken free!" The marketplace erupted into chaos as Amara crashed through stalls and scattered other animals, buyers and sellers shouting and diving out of her way, children laughing at the excitement, and Nkechi's voice rising above it all in a shriek of rage that seemed to crack the sky.
Amara did not look back, did not slow down, just ran with every ounce of energy her transformed body possessed, her hooves pounding the dirt, her heart hammering like drums at a festival, her mind fixed on a single thought: escape, escape, escape. Because somewhere in this vast world, there had to be someone who could undo what Nkechi had done. Someone who understood the old ways and the old magic. Someone who could give her back her voice, her body, her life, her chance to save her father from the evil that wore the face of a loving wife and hid a heart as black as the smoke from Nkechi's cursed pot. Amara ran until her legs trembled and her lungs burned, until the sounds of the marketplace faded behind her and were replaced by the quieter music of the forest, the rustle of leaves, the calls of birds, the whisper of wind through branches. She did not know this part of the bush, had never traveled so far from her village before, but fear pushed her forward even when exhaustion tried to pull her down. The rope still dragged behind her, catching on roots and thorns, but she was too frightened to stop and try to remove it, too aware that Nkechi might be following, might be using her dark magic to track her stepdaughter through the wilderness like a hunter tracking a wounded prey. The path grew narrower and more overgrown, the trees pressing close on either side, their trunks thick and ancient, their roots rising from the ground like the fingers of buried giants trying to claw their way to the surface. Amara stumbled several times, her goat body still feeling foreign and difficult to control, and each time she fell, she wondered if she would have the strength to arise again. But something inside her refused to give up. Perhaps it was the memory of her father's kind face, or the thought of Jide's brave act in helping her escape, or simply the stubborn human spirit that magic could transform but not entirely destroy. She pushed herself up each time, shook the dirt from her fur, and continued forward, following a path that seemed to call to her in ways she could not explain, as if the forest itself was guiding her feet towards some destination that waited ahead. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that filtered through the canopy above, Amara emerged into a clearing unlike any she had ever seen. In its center stood a massive Iroko tree, its trunk so wide that 10 men holding hands could not have circled it, its branches spreading out like arms embracing the entire sky. At the base of this ancient tree sat a small hut made from mud and thatch, so old it seemed to have grown from the earth rather than being built by human hands. And from its doorway came the warm glow of a fire, and the smell of herbs that made Amara's animal nose twitch with recognition, even though her human mind could not name them. A figure appeared in the doorway, an old man, bent with age, but moving with a quiet strength that suggested his body was merely a container for something far more powerful than flesh and bone. His head was completely bald and marked with faint scars that formed patterns too deliberate to be accidental. His eyes milky white with cataracts, but somehow still seeing more than ordinary eyes ever could. He looked directly at Amara, and she felt exposed, as if every secret of her transformation, every moment of her terror, every hope she still carried in her changed heart was visible to him like words written on her very soul. "Come, child," he said, his voice like dry leaves rustling, like water over stone, like something that had spoken before the first villages were built and would continue speaking long after they crumbled. Amara's legs gave out then, not from exhaustion, but from overwhelming relief, and she collapsed at the edge of the clearing, the rope finally snagging on a root and pulling tight, holding her in place like the last chain that needed to be broken before she could be truly free. And through the tears that blurred her vision, she saw Elder Lamin approaching slowly, his ancient hands already beginning to make signs in the air that seemed to glow faintly in the gathering dusk, signs that spoke of magic, of healing, of hope. Elder Lamin led Amara into his hut, and the moment she crossed the threshold, she felt something shift in the air, not threatening, but powerful, like stepping from ordinary rain into a waterfall. The interior was larger than it appeared from outside, its walls lined with clay pots and hanging bundles of dried plants, its floor covered with woven mats that showed patterns so complex they seemed to move in the firelight. The old man gestured for Amara to lie down on a particular mat near the fire, and though her goat body was exhausted and shaking, she obeyed, trusting the stranger in a way she had trusted no one since her mother died. Lamine moved around the space with practiced efficiency, selecting specific herbs from his collection, grinding them in a stone mortar with movements that seemed more like prayer than preparation, humming a tune that had no beginning or end, but seemed to circle back on itself like a snake eating its own tail. "Magic that changes flesh," he said without turning to look at her, as if he could see her perfectly well through the back of his head, "is among the oldest and most dangerous of all medicines. To reverse it requires more than knowledge. It requires sacrifice, balance, a price paid to restore what was stolen." His words sent a chill through Amara's body, and she wondered what price he meant. What more could possibly be taken from her when she had already lost her voice, her body, her home, her father's protection, everything except her consciousness and her memory of who she truly was. Lamine turned finally, holding a calabash filled with a mixture that steamed despite the fact that he had added no hot water to it, and his blind eyes seemed to look not at her but through her, seeing layers of reality that normal vision could not penetrate. "The one who cursed you," he said slowly, "did so using blood magic, your blood, taken secretly while you slept or ate or washed, mixed with her intention and the power of a full moon. To break such a curse, we need something equally powerful but opposite in nature, not blood taken in darkness, but freely given in light, not intended to harm, but offered to heal." He paused, and Amara understood before he spoke the words what he was asking of her. "You must choose to give your blood willingly for your own transformation back, must accept the pain that comes with that giving, must trust that what is broken can be mended if the one who suffers agrees to be part of the mending." Amara did not hesitate. She nodded her goat head firmly, and Lamine smiled for the first time, an expression that transformed his ancient face into something beautiful despite his scars and wrinkles. He produced a small sharp knife that looked like it had been carved from bone, and with movements that were surprisingly gentle, he made a tiny cut on Amara's front leg, allowing exactly 3 drops of blood to fall into the calabash he held beneath. The blood hit the mixture and caused it to hiss and bubble like water thrown on hot coals, and the smell that rose from it was not unpleasant, but rather like rain on dry earth, like flowers opening at dawn, like all good things that had been waiting to emerge. Lamine began to chant in a language that sounded like wind and thunder combined, his voice growing stronger despite his age, and he painted symbols on the ground around Amara's body, using the mixture from the calabash, circles within circles, lines that curved and intersected, shapes that seemed to pulse with their own light. The transformation began slowly, like dawn breaking after the longest night, a warmth spreading through Amara's body that was both painful and pleasurable, both frightening and freeing, and she felt her bones shifting, her muscles remaking themselves, her fur receding as skin emerged beneath it, and through it all she kept her eyes fixed on the fire, on its dancing flames that seemed to echo the changes happening within her, burning away what was false to reveal what was true. When Amara opened her eyes again, human eyes with proper vision and tears gathering in their corners, the hut was filled with early morning light that streamed through the doorway in golden shafts thick with floating dust. She lay curled on her side, naked except for a wrapper that Elder Lamine had carefully placed over her at some point while she slept, and for several heartbeats she simply stared at her own hands, fingers, knuckles, the familiar lines on her palms, unable to believe they were real, that she was real, that the nightmare was over. She sat up slowly, every muscle in her body aching as if she had run 1,000 miles, but it was human pain, normal pain, the kind of discomfort that came from a body working hard and needing rest, not the alien wrongness of being trapped in a form that did not belong to her. "Slowly, slowly," came Elder Lamine's voice from across the hut, where he sat grinding something in his mortar, still humming that endless tune. "The body needs time to remember itself, to settle back into its proper shape. Drink this." He handed her a gourd filled with water that tasted sweeter than anything she had ever drunk, and as the liquid cooled her throat, Amara realized with a start that she could speak again, that the curse that had stolen her voice was truly broken. "Thank you," she said, and the sound of her own voice, rough from disuse but unmistakably hers, brought fresh tears that ran down her cheeks and dripped onto the wrapper covering her lap. "Thank you, Elder, for saving me, for bringing me back, for not turning away when I needed help more desperately than I have ever needed anything in my life." Lamin waved away her thanks with one gnarled hand, but his smile returned, and he nodded as if confirming something he had already known would happen. "The forest brought you to me for a reason, child, and that reason is not yet complete. You have been transformed back, yes, but the one who cursed you still walks free, still lives in your father's house, still plots harm against him, and until that wrong is made right, your story cannot end with a simple return to normal life." His words reminded Amara of everything she had temporarily forgotten in the relief of being human again. In Kechi's dark ritual, the little doll pierced with thorns, her father sleeping peacefully while evil worked against him in the very room next door. Rage began to burn in Amara's chest, not the cold rage of revenge, but the hot rage of justice, of a daughter determined to protect her father from the monster who had married him under false pretenses. "I must go back," she said, standing up despite the weakness in her legs, despite the way the room spun slightly before settling. "I must tell my father the truth, must expose Nkechi for what she is, must stop her before she succeeds in whatever terrible thing she has planned." Lamin nodded slowly, his blind eyes somehow conveying both approval and caution. "Truth is a powerful weapon, child, but it must be wielded carefully. Your stepmother will not confess simply because you accuse her, and without proof, she will call you a liar, a runaway daughter trying to cause trouble, and your father's love for her might cloud his judgment and make him doubt your words." He stood, moving to a particular corner of the hut where several small pouches hung from a rope strung between two posts. But the ancestors are wise, and they have provided a way for truth to be revealed without relying on belief alone. He selected one pouch and brought it to Amara, opening it to show her a powder that shimmered like crushed diamonds mixed with ash. "This is truth powder, made from the bark of the speaking tree and the bones of the honest dead. When mixed with water and drunk, it compels the drinker to speak only truth, removes their ability to lie or hide what they have done, strips away all masks until only the real person remains visible for all to see." The journey back to the village took Amara most of the day, even with Jide appearing at the forest's edge just as the sun reached its highest point, his face breaking into a wide grin of relief when he saw her in human form, whole and unharmed, except for exhaustion and the fierce determination burning in her eyes. "I knew you would find help," he said, taking her hand to steady her when she stumbled over a root. "The old ones in the village speak of Elder Lamin, though few have ever seen him. They say he is the last of the great medicine keepers, that he was ancient when their grandparents were children, that the forest protects him and he protects the forest in return." He did not ask too many questions, seemed to understand that some things were better shown than explained, and simply walked beside her in comfortable silence, occasionally offering her water from a gourd he carried or pointing out the easiest paths through the undergrowth. As they approached the village, Amara felt her heart begin to race. Would her father be angry that she had disappeared? Had Nkechi already poisoned his mind against her with lies about disobedience and disrespect? Had the stepmother's curse against Oba progressed while Amara was gone, or had the ancestors somehow held it in check, waiting for this moment of reckoning? These questions swelled in her mind like leaves in a storm, but she pushed them aside, focusing instead on the weight of the pouch Elder Lamin had given her, now tied securely to the wrapper around her waist, hidden from sight but present, a tool of justice waiting to be used. They entered the village as the sun began its descent toward evening, and immediately Amara noticed that something was wrong. People stood in small clusters talking in hushed voices, and when they saw her, their expressions shifted to surprise and something like fear. One old woman pointed at her and made a sign against evil, and a mother pulled her child behind her skirts as Amara passed. "They think you are a spirit," Jide whispered, his own nervousness showing in the way his voice wavered. Nkechi told everyone you ran away into the forest, and when people go into the bush and don't return for days, the village assumes they have been taken by something that does not give them back. But Amara did not care what the villagers thought. Her only focus was her father's compound, which came into view as they turned the final corner. The compound looked unchanged from the outside, peaceful and ordinary, but Amara knew better now, knew that evil could wear the most normal of faces, could hide in the most familiar of places, could sleep beside you in your own bed and smile while planning your destruction. She entered through the main gate, Jide staying respectfully at the entrance, and immediately heard voices coming from inside the house. Her father's voice, weaker than she remembered, and Nkechi's voice, sweet as honey and just as dangerous. Amara paused at the doorway, gathering her courage, and then she stepped inside to find her father lying on a mat, his face gaunt and pale, his eyes sunken in a way that spoke of illness settling in like an unwelcome guest, and Nkechi kneeling beside him, holding a bowl of soup that steamed with an aroma that made Amara's stomach turn, because she recognized the smell from that terrible night. It was the same bitter scent that had risen from the cursed pot, the smell of dark medicine meant to weaken and harm, not heal. "Father!" Amara cried out, and Oba's head turned slowly toward her, his eyes widening in shock and joy and confusion all at once. And Nkechi's face went through its own transformation, from false concern to genuine fury, to a carefully constructed mask of relief so quickly that anyone who blinked would have missed the truth of her feelings. "Amara, my daughter, you have returned." Oba tried to sit up, but his strength failed him and he fell back against the mat, breathing hard from even that small effort. And Amara's heart broke to see her strong father reduced to such weakness, to know that Nkechi's magic was responsible, that every day she had been gone was a day that poison had been working its way deeper into his body.
"Yes, father, I have returned." Amara sat kneeling beside him on the opposite side from Nkechi, taking his hand in hers and feeling how cold his skin was, how thin his fingers had become. "And I have returned to tell you terrible truths, to expose wickedness that has been hiding in our home, to save you from the one who pretends to care for you while actually working your destruction." Nkechi's mask slipped again, just for a moment, and Amara saw murder in her eyes before the stepmother quickly composed herself and spoke in a voice dripping with false concern. "The poor child has clearly suffered some kind of fever in the bush, husband. She is speaking nonsense, making wild accusations. Let me prepare her some medicine to help clear her mind." But Amara was faster. She pulled the pouch from her waist and turned to her father. "Father, I ask you to trust me one more time, to believe in your daughter, even though I know what I am about to say will sound impossible. This woman you married is a witch who has been slowly killing you with cursed medicine, who transformed me into a goat using dark magic when I discovered her ritual, who tried to sell me at the market so I could never tell you the truth." And Oba looked between his daughter and his wife, confusion and pain warring in his expression, and for a terrible moment, Amara thought he would refuse, would choose to believe in Nkechi, would send his daughter away as mad or malicious. But then he nodded slowly, exhausted beyond the capacity for complicated decisions, and said simply, "Let it be done. Let truth be revealed, whatever that truth may be." Amara wasted no time. She mixed the truth powder with water in a cup, watching it dissolve and shimmer, and then she approached Nkechi, who backed away until she hit the wall, her eyes wild like a trapped animal, her mask completely gone now, revealing the ugly hatred beneath.
"Drink this," Amara commanded, her voice steady and strong despite the trembling in her hands. "Or refuse and show by your refusal that you have something to hide, that my accusations have merit, that you fear what your own mouth will say when it cannot lie." The stepmother looked toward the door as if calculating whether she could run, but Jide had entered silently and stood blocking the exit, his young face set with determination, and behind him, drawn by the raised voices, several village elders and neighbors began to gather, their curiosity overcoming their usual reluctance to interfere in family matters. Nkechi was trapped, surrounded, exposed, and she knew it. With shaking hands, she took the cup and drank it in one quick swallow, and then the magic began to work. "Did you transform Amara into a goat using dark magic?" Amara asked, his voice barely more than a whisper, as if afraid of the answer, even as he needed to hear it. "Yes," Nkechi said, and the word came out like it was torn from her throat, like she was trying desperately to keep it inside but could not, and her face contorted with rage at her own betrayal. "Have you been poisoning me slowly with cursed medicine intended to make me sick and eventually die?" "Yes," came the answer again, each admission causing gasps from the growing crowd at the door. "Why? What have I done to deserve this cruelty?" Oba asked, tears running down his gaunt cheeks, and Nkechi laughed then, a sound that was more animal than human, more pain than humor. "Because you loved her more than me. Because even with her mother gone, there was no room for me in your heart. Because I wanted what I could never have, a husband who looked at me the way you looked at your daughter, with pure love untainted by suspicion or obligation." The truth poured out of her like water from a broken dam, confessions of jealousy, of contacting the 3 women who practiced dark magic, of stealing Oba's cloth to make the cursed doll, of planning to inherit everything once he died and his troublesome daughter was gone, sold far away where she could never return to claim her birthright. With each word, Nkechi seemed to shrink, to become smaller and older, as if the truth itself was consuming her from the inside out, burning away everything false until only ashes remained. When she finally stopped talking, exhausted from fighting the magic that compelled her honesty, Oba spoke in a voice that, despite its weakness, carried the full weight of his authority and his broken heart. "You are no longer welcome in this house, in this village, or anywhere near me or my daughter. By the power vested in me by the elders and by the king of this land, I banish you from Akure, and if you are seen here again, it will be counted as a crime against the community, and justice will be swift." The village elders who had gathered nodded their agreement, and 2 of them stepped forward to take Nkechi by the arms, lifting her to her feet and preparing to escort her beyond the village boundaries, to leave her with nothing but the clothes on her back and the weight of her evil deeds. As she passed Amara, Nkechi spat on the ground and whispered, "You may have won today, but the darkness I touched will never completely leave you. Some transformations cannot entirely be undone." But Amara was not afraid, because she looked at her father, saw him trying to smile despite his weakness, saw love still shining in his eyes despite everything that had happened, and she knew that whatever shadows Nkechi's magic had cast, the light of truth and family was stronger, that healing would come with time, that her father would recover now that the poison was stopped, that their home would be filled again with the simple peace that existed before evil had walked through their door, wearing the mask of a wife and mother. In the weeks that followed, Oba's strength slowly returned, not quickly, because dark magic leaves scars that time must heal gently, but steadily, day by day, until he could walk to his farm again, until his laughter echoed through the compound, until he and Amara could sit together in the evenings, watching the sun set and speaking of ordinary things without fear or shadow between them. And though Amara never forgot what she had learned, that evil could hide in familiar faces, that magic was real and could be used for terrible purposes, that transformation was a kind of death even if you survived it, she also learned that courage was stronger than curses, that truth was more powerful than lies, that a father's love and a daughter's determination could overcome even the darkest of nights. And somewhere in the forest, an ancient man still hummed his endless song, still kept watch over the balance between light and dark, still waited to help those who needed him most, because some debts of gratitude can never be fully repaid, only honored by living well and helping others in turn, passing forward the gift of rescue to those who might one day need it just as desperately as she once had.